Muy buenos días a todos, muchas gracias por estar aquí, felicidades a todos los asistentes por venir, por ser parte de Reset 2018 y por ser parte de este cambio. Como mencionaba ahorita Carlos, esto es parte de un cambio, de una innovación que vamos a tener para nuestra ciudad y como en realidad lo mencionaron todos, esto forma parte de los esfuerzos de muchas personas que están detrás de este evento de Reset. Gracias por estar aquí. Y bueno, pues ya sin preámbulos, vamos a comenzar con las conferencias de este día. Para empezar, quiero invitar a nuestro primer speaker de esta mañana. Él nos va a hablar sobre Epic Storytelling in Today's Television. Él es coproductor ejecutivo para una serie de Netflix que se llama Wizards, Tales of Arcadia and DreamWorks Animation. Y también es guionista, productor y autor de Los Ángeles, galardonado con un Emmy y nominado a los premios Annie. Ha sido escritor de varios proyectos para Netflix, Cartoon Network, Comedy Central, Warner Brothers, DreamWorks Animation y National Lampoon, incluida la serie animada de Guillermo del Toro, Trollhunters, Tales of Arcadia de Netflix. Recientemente fue escritor líder para la serie Unikitty de Cartoon Network, serie spinoff de The Lego Movie, y actualmente es coproductor ejecutivo y autor-productor de la próxima serie de Netflix, Wizards, Tales of Arcadia, de DreamWorks Animation. Quiero que le den un fuerte aplauso, por favor, a nuestro primer speaker de esta mañana. Él es Aaron Waltke.
Yeah, podium and then my little clicker, I guess, because I had a file that I had sent over. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Reset 2018. I'm very honored to be here to speak with you today. My name is Aaron Waltke, and as he said, I'm a screenwriter and a producer of television and movies. I'm currently residing in La La Land, Los Angeles, California. I'm currently a showrunner and co-executive producer for Guillermo del Toro's Netflix original series, Wizards, Tales of Arcadia. From DreamWorks Animation. Over the years, I've written for TV, movies, web series, you name it, for companies like DreamWorks, Netflix, Warner Brothers, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, National Lampoon, and more. This year, I was nominated for an Annie Award, and I won an Emmy Award for my work on Guillermo del Toro's Netflix series, Trollhunters. So that was really cool. Oh, thank you. While I count myself very fortunate in my career, it was not for lack of failing and trying and failing and trying again. Like I'm sure many of you here today, I'd always had aspirations of telling stories since I was a kid. Unfortunately for me, there simply weren't many opportunities to make Hollywood movies growing up in between two cornfields in the middle of Indiana. So I took a chance and I moved to LA where I literally only knew maybe two people. But, you know, all the same, I tried. It was hard. But eventually I ventured into the unknown and came out with the tools I needed to succeed as a writer. So today I'd like to share some of those tools with you. I'll be walking you through some of the basics I've learned about telling a story, how to make sure that story is a good one, and how to tell one for a global audience, and how to adapt it to the medium you're telling it in. Also, I'll end with some discussion about the craft of writing, and specifically screenwriting, and open it up for any questions you might have. So, first, part one, inspiration, finding your story. If you're going to have a story, have a big story, or none at all. Joseph Campbell. The ability to tell a good story is an essential skill, not only in writing, but in all walks of life. Whether it's making an argument, or closing a sale, or delving into politics, or designing a website, or going on a first date, the ability to craft a narrative with an intriguing beginning, an interesting middle, and a fascinating finale is invaluable to our society. If you don't know where to begin, don't panic. Nobody does. At least not right away. But there are a few useful tricks to help you jumpstart the creative process. A common question I get is, where do you get your ideas? It's a bit like asking, what's the meaning of life? Or why are we made of atoms instead of something else? Or why are bananas yellow? And there is an answer to all of them, but it's not going to be satisfying because the simple explanation is, I don't know. The long answer, which I assume you're here for, is that ideas can come from everywhere. Life, art, tragedy, irony, it all comes down to experiences that either you've experienced by serendipity or someone has provoked a reaction in you. And that reaction, that emotional reaction, is the kernel of something. As you attempt to figure out why that was so provocative, the scope of its importance will reveal itself. Maybe it's a setup for a dumb joke you want to tell at your friends at the bar, or maybe it's an opening salvo in an epic story that is waiting to unfold. Part 2, telling stories in today's world. Modern audiences know story, and they know it well. We live in the most story-literate society that has ever existed. Now, what do I mean by that? Am I suggesting that people today are the smartest, or the most well-informed, or the most educated populace in the human history? No, not at all. If you watch the news, I think you'll see plenty of evidence to the contrary on that count. What I'm suggesting is that today, most of the planet has more access to information, and in particular stories, than ever before. And it's profoundly changed our understanding of what makes a good story. But it wasn't always that way. So let's take a journey back in time. Long ago, access to knowledge and ideas was a luxury limited to a select few. Oral traditions like, ancient Greece, they acted out by a class of singing poets. But, things like the Iliad and the Odyssey usually were only recited to male-only audiences. And Shakespeare's plays were only affordable to people from the middle class. They'd have to save a week in order to attend even those plays. And then the printing press made books widely available, but that's only helpful if you know how to read. So that all changed when the 20th century happened. Basically, with advances in mass communication, audiences have been exposed to a flood of narratives heretofore unseen, tales told in so many ways very quickly in a scope beyond what they've ever experienced before. With moving pictures, telecommunications, the internet, streaming services, the luxury of access to stories is now a common utility. Thanks to on-demand services made widely available, time and space are no longer barriers to entry to experience anything whenever you want. For decades, we've been viewing and telling and retelling our tales to millions, and then those have told those tales again to create their own voices. Art has become a conversation between everyone around the world, creators and viewers. Our unifying language is media. There are citizens in countries who have never lived in a democracy but can tell you every beat of the latest Avengers movie. It's a new age for storytellers, one that's both exciting and intimidating. These new global audiences have seen so many stories that they've become savvy to the tricks of the trade. They can figure out what's coming next. They crave what's familiar, but also what's new. Stories that are bold and reinvent the genre, but are also accessible and remain clear. So how do you cut through the noise and write a story worth telling? It may be intimidating to try and create for this new international story-literate landscape, but don't worry. Deep down, the fundamentals remain the same because mediums change, but stories do not. What has begun, what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Ecclesiastes. Oftentimes, young writers have told me they believe stories must be original and created by some pure genius of a legendary author in order to be good. Well, I'm afraid I got news for you. Nothing is original. Everything has been done. Even the most outlandish, incredible, totally unique artist you've seen has been inspired by or is reacting to or is directly ripping off what has come before him. In cultural studies, this is sometimes called the Great Conversation. Every author is building off what's been done before, consciously or not, and having a dialogue with the ideas of our intellectual and artistic forefathers. Our culture is a massive swaying tower of inspiration, always aspiring to something greater, but ever reliant on its predecessors. Or another way of putting it, if I have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants, which was Isaac Newton, although ironically he stole that quote from somebody else a few centuries earlier. No matter how hard we try, we're plagiarizing the past, and that's okay. We understand where we came from, and that gives us a starting place to have a new discussion on what it means to be in the here and now. Adding your voice to this centuries-long conversation is how we as artists communicate with the world at large. The hero's journey. In epic storytelling, something that often comes up in any writer's room is the idea of the hero's journey. Popularized by Joseph Campbell, it's the concept that all stories in every culture share a common shape of a hero venturing into the unknown, facing their demons, making great sacrifices, and returning with newfound knowledge. Campbell's version had a lot more to it, with moments like refusing the call, meeting with the goddess, atoning with the father, being born again, yada, yada, yada. But it's all pretty complicated, but the basics hold true. In television, this has been adapted by screenwriter Dan Harmon into what he calls a story circle, where each episode encapsulates a mini hero's journey. The hero starts with a want, or starts in a familiar place, but has a want or need. So he ventures out into the unknown, gets what they want, but pay a heavy price, learn from it, try to atone, and then return home having changed. So basically, that all it really is the story that we all undergo, which is like whenever you're discovering something new, you just go into like an unfamiliar place, try something, fail, pay a price for it, and then come out the other side having grown from it. This general storytelling convention can be applied to nearly all stories, from the Epic of Gilgamesh all the way to Zootopia. An epic involves someone taking a risk, stepping out of their comfort zone in hopes of attaining something, whether it's conquering the complexities of high school existence, or proving they can make it as a cop in the big city, or defeating an ancient evil that lurks beneath their otherwise idyllic suburban town. The hero's journey has always involved the protagonist in discovering they must grow in ways they didn't realize, by reaching for something, grasping, but making sacrifices along the way. When all hope is lost, they dig deep within themselves and root out the fatal flaw that led them astray, then fight to make things right. We're all on a hero's journey of sorts, dreaming of some distant goal, reaching towards an ambition that will require great risk and uncertainty to achieve. But if you're willing to take that trip into the unknown, you may come out the other side having grown into something new, something stronger, something ready for the next adventure. Infuse your characters with this, and you'll always be telling a great story. Yes, all stories are the same, and our audiences know them well. So you may be asking, what will set your story apart and make them stand out for the rest? Part 4, finding your voice. All of us have to learn how to invent our lives, make them up, and imagine them. If we don't, our lives get made up for us by other people. Ursula K. Le Guin. So, write what you know. A common adage that you may have heard. It's useful advice, but it's often misinterpreted, I find. As a starting point, it can be helpful to dig into your own past and focus on what makes your experiences relatively unique to the world at large. Something that is deeply personal to your own journey, that may be uncommon in the public eye, and express your voice to a wider audience of what's important and essential in our global community as it grows, and more avenues to communicate that message avail themselves. But that's not to say that the only stories you're allowed to tell with confidence are about your childhood growing up in Texas or Mexico. Your past can and will influence everything you do, but a better way to understand the phrase, write what you know, might be, write what you know to be emotionally true. For instance, I'm a genre writer, which means the stories I tell involve experiences I've never had, fantasy and monsters, wizards fighting trolls, swords and sorcery, science fictional elseworlds. Obviously I've never experienced any of that. So how do I know a story will resonate with my audience if it's about something as alien and different from my own personal journey? And the answer is deceptively simple: metaphor. Ideally, a metaphor that speaks to a shared aspect of what it means to be us, to be human. Draw from your personal experiences, the people you know, the joy and suffering you remember, and run them through the filter of the extraordinary circumstances of the story you're trying to tell. For instance, Lord of the Rings was an epic saga about a band of heroes who set out to defeat the forces of Mordor by destroying a magic ring in the fires of Mount Doom. But it was also the story of Frodo, a young man who grew up in a peaceful bubble, blissfully unaware of the troubles of the outside of his comfortable home, but he's forced out into the scary unknown and must do what's right when no one else would. It's a story of isolationism and power and a person putting their ideals on the line and standing up for them. I don't know about you, but that sounds a lot like the transition from childhood to adulthood. Things turn out to be a lot more complicated than you thought. And while you may be okay, other people out there might be suffering, and it's up to you to make a choice to fix the problems that generations past did not. Good stories work that way. You can zoom from the micro to the macro, and there's something meaningful at every level, reflecting backward, telling us something about human relationships and the world at large. That brings us to part 5, plot versus story. And here's a little quote from my boss, Guillermo del Toro. Plot is the rhythm, story is the melody. Now, what he means by that. When writing a story, it's important not to get caught up in the details that you lose sight of what makes it meaningful to your characters, and by extension, your audience. Many people assume a good story is based on a great idea alone. I've heard many tales of young writers, new to the craft, who are paranoid about their incredible one-of-a-kind logline being stolen, a single sentence that's sure to be their ticket to the big time, even though they haven't actually written a word of it yet. The truth is, good writing isn't about interesting stuff happening. If anything, that's a hallmark of bad writing. Good writing is about emotional consequences for interesting characters. For instance, if a stranger enters a bank and lights a stick of dynamite on fire and shouts, "I have dynamite, I'm going to blow up this bank," and then your hero springs into action to stop him, and then Dynamite Guy is never mentioned again, you might think that's a pretty bad story, not a great scene. You'd be asking, who's Dynamite Guy? Why did he do that? The lack of motivation is distracting to the drama. However, if Dynamite Guy enters a room and says, "This bank took everything from my family, and heroes like your protagonist did nothing, so I'm going to change that with a bang," suddenly we have something to go off of, a villain with a vendetta. Maybe not a lot, but at least we have motivation. We have a theme, and we have some kind of mysterious connection to our main character. What I've just described is meant to highlight the distinction between plot and story. Plot is the action occurring and why, while story is what it means to your characters. Famously, Alfred Hitchcock didn't care what the actual plot of his movies were. In fact, his heroes often pursued things that ultimately proved to be meaningless. What he was more interested in was following the story, the thrills of a man who must make an impossible choice when he's mistaken for a spy, or someone who's with a broken leg who thinks he witnessed a murder out his rear window. What the spies were actually up to in North by Northwest didn't really matter nearly as much as the behavior of the hapless ad executive played by Cary Grant, who's accidentally thrust into a dangerous world of espionage and struggles to find a way out of it without compromising his morals. Another way of putting it, plot is the steak writers give the guard dog while the burglar does his business. Now, obviously Hammond isn't being literal about breaking and entering. He's being metaphorical about how writers have to be a bit sneaky and how they get their audiences to feel things. They use the plot to distract the audience just enough so that they can manipulate your emotions without you noticing, to get you wrapped up in a story enough that you suddenly care about what happens to the characters and have to see what happens next to them. And before you know it, even the toughest moviegoer is bawling his eyes out at the end of Coco. A few other examples. Die Hard. The plot is a cop fights terrorists who have taken over a skyscraper, but the story is about John McClane reconnecting with his strange wife at her office Christmas party. The Star Wars trilogy. The plot is the Rebel Alliance battling for independence against the Empire, but the story is about a farmer named Luke who realizes his deadbeat dad isn't beyond redemption. Toy Story, the plot is a toy cowboy who's replaced by a fancy new action figure, but the story is about, with the help of his rival, Woody, the wooden cowboy, realizes there are things that are more important than being the favorite, such as being there for one another. And finally, the plot of The Wizard of Oz is about a girl who crushes someone with a house and teams up with a band of social outcasts to kill again. But the story is a fun fantasy romp about friendship. All right, part 6, ands, buts, and therefores. Another key... 1 minute? Oh, okay. Let me skip ahead then. Holy cow. Okay. You know what? Let's just skip to the end. A few final words then. Creating something from nothing is a difficult skill to learn. Few things strike fear to the hearts of writers like a blank page. But I promise it's far from impossible. Just knuckle down and do the work. It can be intimidating to take the leap, but I embolden you to do it all the same. Don't be afraid to fail, because we all do. I certainly have. But when the universe beats you senseless and crushes your dreams, all you can do is get up and try again. The world needs your voice. Throw yourself back into the grind and let it be heard. Speak a little louder. Find your words, choose them carefully, and unleash them on the world. We need you now more than ever. Success is where luck meets preparation. Go out and knock on doors until your knuckles bleed. You'll hear a lot of no's over and over and over again. I did. But the reality is you only need one yes, and then the door is thrown wide open. I encourage you all to venture forth in the unknown. Make cool things with cool people, and surround yourself with people more talented than you. Be kind, work hard, take the plunge, make sacrifices, and grow. Then return home as a conquering hero. All of you have a story to tell. How you tell it is up to you. Good luck. Thank you so much. I don't know if we have time for Q&A. Or we do? Okay, great. So yeah, I don't know if there are any questions about myself or my career, or just about the craft of screenwriting, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Yes?
Let me use the microphone.
Oh, yeah.
¿Tenemos otro micrófono? Están los dos, ¿verdad? Gracias. Sí, sí llegan al frente. You get to keep the same one, okay?
That time just flies by. Wow.
Hi, thanks for your lecture.
Sure.
I have a very simple question.
Yes.
How anyone knows when you find your voice? What are those key
Qualities.
things? Yeah, qualities that
I
make
would
you
say,
recognize?
there sometimes when you're writing a story, there's a temptation to chase whatever is popular right now. You see what's on the air, like, oh, that movie was popular, so I'll just do whatever is other people are doing. And I think finding your voice is really about just sort of like, what makes you laugh? What makes you excited? And ideally something that you haven't seen on TV or in movies or in books. And you pursue that. And then when you take the opportunity to put yourself out in the world in a very vulnerable way like that, and then somebody responds to it and say, I've never seen this before, this is really great. I think that's when you know, oh, I've tapped into something. That's not to say that just doing something different is automatically going to be success. But what it is you need to try something different and cultivate it and take feedback and then find how that sort of unique perspective or sensibility fits into the global audience that you're trying to reach. And it'll take a little bit of trial and error, but I think eventually when you find people coming to you and saying, this is great, I've never seen this before, then you'll know that you've found your voice.
Tenemos tiempo para dos preguntas más. Okay.
Hi, I admire you and your work a lot. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
It's always been my dream to write at DreamWorks, and I wanted to know if there's something you wish you knew before you started, or if there's something that's like a key for me to guide myself to get there.
To work in DreamWorks
Yes.
or in animation, I would say, always make sure that you're writing something that feels like it should be animated. That's one thing. It's like sometimes people will think that means they have to make it childish or dumb, and I don't believe that at all. What it means is just like things are just a little heightened. It means that you're telling bigger and bolder stories, usually epic stories. And what it really means for DreamWorks especially is it's about finding the heart. You can have the comedy, you can have the laughs and the jokes and the cool action fights, but really it comes down to, and that's what I was trying to impart today, is like it's about finding your character and finding the emotional reactions of your characters and and trying to say something about friendship and learning and understanding something new about a world and each other. If you do that and just try your best to seek your own voice and add something new to the conversation, then I think you'll be definitely on your way.
Muy bien. ¿Una pregunta más? Última pregunta.
Yes.
At what age do you find your greatest story, or one of them?
Like, what age did I write my best story?
Yes.
Oh gosh, I don't know if I have written my best story yet. I think it was in college when I really started. When I was a kid, I would be in the backyard with a little video camera and making little movies and such. And I always had a passion for storytelling, but I think it was in college when I started performing some of this stuff for other people and actually showing my work to people outside of just like my close friends and realizing like, oh, there's something here. That's when I started to realize that I wanted to do this for a living. And that was a hard conversation I had to have with my dad, who wanted me to be a dentist and tell him, actually, no, I want to move to Hollywood and pursue my dreams. And my parents were like, oh, Lord, we're going to have to support him for the rest of his life. But it didn't work out that way, and I count myself very lucky that I was able to find a tribe of other like-minded artists and really talented people at DreamWorks, who kind of shared my vision for just telling really unique and weird and fun and funky and strange stories. But you just keep making stuff. That's all. You never know what you can make until you try it, and the story will change. It'll tell you what it needs to be, and sometimes your story grows beyond you. Like some of the shows that I've worked on, like the audiences have made it their own, and the fandoms have sort of created this whole mythology unto itself, and that's okay. You let the stories grow beyond you, and then that suddenly becomes another thing that can inspire you. Which is a very roundabout way of saying, like, I like to think that I've written some very good stories, but I'm always looking to see how I can change and how I can be better. And it's the same with everybody. You never know what you can accomplish until you try.
Okay. Un aplauso fuerte, por favor, para Aaron Waltke.
Thank you.
Aaron, in behalf of Transcelco, Black Labs Technology Hub, and Fundación Axel, I want to give you this reward.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
For being part of this, the biggest binational event, the biggest binational innovation and entrepreneurship event in the border area.
Gracias.
Gracias a ti.
Thank you so much.